On a rain-black Oregon road, deaf Navy SEAL Caleb Mercer found a wounded German shepherd dragging herself through sleet toward an abandoned dairy. Her 5 newborn puppies were freezing inside. Saving them should have been enough, but Raven kept returning to one locked building, and what waited there would expose the mercy, shame, and lies buried inside Caleb's own family. Winter did not fall on Coos Bay, so much as crawl in from the Pacific with wet hands. It soaked cedar bark until the trees turned nearly black, filled the ditches with brown water, and drove sleet sideways across Cedar Ridge, where every loose sheet of metal on an old dairy roof found its own bitter voice. Caleb Mercer heard only pieces of it. At 43, he had learned that the world did not disappear because one ear refused to carry it. It changed shape. Sound became pressure in a floorboard, a pulse in a pipe, a warning in the way gulls lifted from a field before a truck crested the hill. He stood 6'1", broad through the shoulders, with dark brown hair beginning to silver at the temples and a thin scar cutting through his left eyebrow. A bone-anchored hearing device rested behind his right ear. His left ear had been mostly useless since a blast during a Navy SEAL operation had taken the clean edges off sound and left him with silence that arrived in uneven rooms. People called him quiet. That was easier than calling him watchful. He was finishing work at Ruth Gallagher's cranberry farm when the storm worsened. The pump house smelled of wet iron old belts and the sharp mineral stink of standing water. Ruth stood behind him with both hands on her cane, a narrow woman with a wool hat pulled low and an opinion about every bolt he touched. "That thing sounded like a dying piano," she said. Caleb turned enough to read her mouth. "Pianos don't pump bog water." "Then this one had no excuse." He tightened the final clamp, set his palm on the pump casing, and waited for the vibration to settle into an even rhythm. Good. Not pretty, but honest. Ruth offered him the spare room because the county road was already flooding near the low bridge. Caleb told her he would take the ridge road home. She stared at him over the top of her glasses. "That road runs past Hawthorne Dairy." He wiped grease from his thumb. "Roads do that. They pass things. That place has been empty 2 years. Then nobody will be in my way." Ruth made the sound older women make when a man chooses inconvenience and calls it practicality. Caleb collected his tools, climbed into his truck, and drove north through a storm that made the headlights look tired. His navy pea coat lay across the passenger seat, damp at the collar from the pump house. He wore a charcoal thermal shirt, waterproof cargo pants, and boots that had known engine oil, salt water, and more mud than any footwear deserved. Wind shoved the truck as if testing his grip. He slowed before the bend near Hawthorne because the pavement there dipped beside a drainage ditch. That was when he saw the shape. At first it seemed like a black trash bag snagged in the reeds. Then it lifted its head. 2 ears, long muzzle, one front leg dragging through the sleet. Caleb braked without thinking and felt the rear tires slide a foot before they caught. He sat still for one breath, watching the animal try to rise and fail. Then he pulled on gloves and stepped into the weather. Cold rain struck the skin around his eyes like thrown gravel. The dog was a female German shepherd, black and tan, her dark saddle matted flat with ice, her chest and legs the color of wet wheat. Her belly showed the loose swelling of recent birth. Blood marked one paw. A pale scar circled her neck beneath the fur, too even to be an accident. When Caleb crouched, she showed her teeth, not fully, only enough to tell him she had rules. "Easy," he said, unsure how much voice the storm stole from him. Her amber eyes fixed on him. Not wild, worse than wild. Determined. She looked past him toward the abandoned dairy, then tried to stand again. 3 steps. Collapse. Caleb moved closer. She warned him with a low vibration he felt more in his knees than heard. He stopped. The dog dragged herself toward a break beneath the fence. Caleb looked toward Hawthorne. The old dairy sat in the dark, with its milking parlor roof sagging under wet snow. The silo, a black thumb against a dirty sky. Nobody in Coos Bay had asked much about Hawthorne since Linda Caldwell lost it to the bank and left town with rumors chasing her like unpaid bills. The dog pulled again. Caleb had seen men use the last of their strength to point toward someone who still needed help. He had obeyed then. He obeyed now. "Show me." She went under the fence. He followed. The distance to the old calf shed was less than 100 yards, but rain and sleet made it feel like a march through broken glass. Twice the dog fell. Twice she refused his hands. At the shed, she squeezed through a gap where rot had opened the wall. Caleb ducked after her, flashlight between his teeth, shoulder scraping wet wood. Inside, the storm dulled. The air smelled of moldy hay, rust, and old milk gone sour in the bones of the building. The shepherd stopped beside an overturned feeder. For a moment, Caleb saw nothing. Then the hay moved. 5 newborn puppies lay pressed together in a shallow hollow, damp fur clinging to their tiny bodies, mouths opening and closing with no sound he could trust himself to hear. One shifted weakly. Another lay too still. The mother lowered herself beside them and nudged each body with careful urgency. Caleb's chest tightened. He had handled wounded men while rounds cracked over his head. Training had named those motions: pressure, airway, extraction. Here there were no names large enough. Only 5 small lives cooling in the wet, and a mother who had dragged herself to the road because hope sometimes used the only body it had left. He took off his coat and laid it beside the nest. "I need to touch them." She did not understand the words, but she understood the pause. He reached slowly. Her lips lifted. He waited until they lowered. The nearest puppy fit in one palm and was cold enough to make his fingers stiff. Caleb moved fast then, though never sharply. Emergency towels from the truck, heat packs wrapped in cloth. His coat folded into a sling. The mother watched him gather the puppies, and when he bent for her, she gave one exhausted protest before letting her head fall against his shoulder. She weighed less than she should have. At Cedar Ridge, Caleb carried the puppies into his cabin and set them in a wooden tool crate lined with towels. He filled bottles with warm water, wrapped them in socks, and placed them near the tiny bodies, not beneath them. The mother struggled through the doorway until she saw the crate. Then she collapsed beside it and counted each puppy with her nose. Caleb called Dr. Claire Bennett, who answered on the 3rd try, and told him to warm slowly, keep them dry, and not feed until they showed enough movement to swallow. The signal failed before she finished cursing the weather. At some point, the hearing device behind Caleb's right ear chirped and died from moisture. The room thinned into that private, dangerous quiet he hated admitting could frighten him. He could not hear a puppy cry. He could not hear the mother shift. He set his bare palm against the side of the crate and waited. There, a faint tremor. Another. Small, uneven, alive. The mother watched him with amber eyes. Around her neck hung an old copper tag scratched nearly smooth. In the firelight, Caleb made out the shape of a bird with spread wings. "Raven," he said. The shepherd lifted her head as if the name had not been given but returned. Outside, the storm pressed its wet hands against the cabin walls. Inside, Caleb kept his palm on the crate until dawn began to gray the windows, and when he finally looked up, Raven was staring past him toward Hawthorne Dairy, toward the dark buildings beyond the ridge, as if something there still had not been brought in from the cold. Morning came to Cedar Ridge, under a low pewter sky, with fog snagged in the fir trees and meltwater ticking from the eaves like an impatient clock. The storm had passed, but the road below the cabin was a stripe of brown slush, and the old dairy fields looked bruised beneath patches of wet snow. Caleb had slept in fragments, never more than 20 minutes at a time. The 5 puppies lived inside a schedule written on the back of a feed invoice. Warmth check, gum color, movement, weight if the kitchen scale stopped pretending it was too dignified for this work. Raven lay beside the crate with her muzzle on the towel edge, watching every move Caleb made as if he were a contractor she had hired under protest. At 8:40, tires pressed through the gravel outside. Caleb felt them through the floor before the engine reached his right ear. Raven rose too fast and nearly fell. Her body moved between the crate and the door, weak but absolute. "Doctor," Caleb said. Raven did not accept titles as proof. The knock came hard enough for him to feel in the doorframe. Dr. Claire Bennett stood on the porch in a raincoat over teal scrubs, carrying 2 black cases and wearing the expression of a woman who had personally been insulted by every pothole in Coos County. She was 50 tall strong through the arms with gray threaded through dark blonde hair, pinned badly under a knit cap. "You look like something the tide rejected," she said. Caleb stepped aside. "Road bad. I was talking about you." Claire entered, stamped mud from her boots, and paused at the sight of Raven. She did not crouch too close. She did not offer a hand. Good veterinarian, good instincts. "Has she eaten?" Claire asked, facing Caleb so he could read her mouth. "A little boiled chicken, water twice. Vomiting? No. Puppies? Alive." That was not a medical measurement. It was the one I cared about at 3 in the morning. Claire gave him a look that almost became a smile and went to work. She weighed each puppy in a soft sling, checked mouths and bellies, and marked numbers in a notebook. The smallest female protested with a movement so fierce and tiny that Caleb felt his throat close. "This one needs help getting a place to nurse," Claire said. "Every 2 hours, maybe more. You always bring good news. Only when people pay extra." Raven tolerated the exam until Claire touched the injured paw. Her lips tightened. Caleb knelt beside her shoulder, not holding her down, only letting his hand rest where she could feel it. Claire cleaned the wound, wrapped it, checked her temperature, and parted the fur along her neck. The scar beneath was pale and hard, a full ring pressed into memory. Claire's face changed. This was not from a normal collar. Caleb looked closer. The mark ran deeper at the sides. Cable. Could be. Chain. Something left on too long. The skin learned the shape. Raven turned her head toward Caleb. He did not look away. Some wounds healed by closing. Others stayed as maps. Claire gave fluids, left medication, and then drew a scanner from her case. It beeped over Raven's shoulder. Caleb caught only the thin edge of the sound, but Claire's eyes sharpened. "She's chipped." The tablet took 3 tries to connect through the poor signal. Rain crawled down the window. Raven nudged the crate. Claire read the record, then looked at the copper bird tag. "Registered name is Raven." Caleb stared at the dog. That was already her name. "Looks that way." The confirmation unsettled him more than it should have. In the night, he had believed he gave the dog something, a word, to stand under a temporary place in the world. Instead, the name had been inside her all along, carried beneath the skin when food, warmth, and safety had been stripped away. Claire turned the tablet toward him. Owner, Linda Caldwell Hawthorne, Dairy. Disconnected phone number. Address listed as the abandoned property beyond the ridge. Linda cared about her animals, Claire said after a moment. Private woman. Stubborn. People said plenty after she left. People say plenty when a woman runs out of money before she runs out of pride. Caleb watched Raven nose the smallest puppy back toward warmth. Then why leave her? Claire closed the tablet. That is a question, not an answer. The words landed harder than Caleb wanted. By noon, Claire had called the county animal records office and a rescue coordinator in Eugene. The puppies could not travel yet. Raven needed to nurse them until they were stronger. Caleb said he was not keeping them. Claire wrote something in her notebook. I did not ask. You were thinking it. I think many things. Most of them are billable. For the next several days, Cedar Ridge became smaller and stranger. Raven began eating. The puppies gained grams that Caleb celebrated with the seriousness of a man reading weather reports before a landing. The largest male learned to wedge himself across two siblings as if claiming real estate. The smallest female fought for space with a grim little determination that made Caleb position her before the others. Raven also began collecting objects. One dish towel vanished, then a wool sock, then the second sock which Caleb found pinned beneath her foreleg. I need those, he told her. Raven placed her chin on them and closed her eyes. He lost the argument. Worse, he respected the strategy. On the fourth afternoon, with rain thinning to mist, Raven stood at the door and stared southeast. Caleb clipped a lead to her collar, thinking she needed the yard. She did not turn toward the grass. She faced Hawthorne. No. Raven pulled once. Not hard, clearly. You are in no condition to travel. She looked back at him with the patient disappointment of a creature dealing with a slow student. The next day, she did it again. On the sixth day, after Claire cleared her for a short walk, Caleb let her choose. Raven led him along the fence across a field soaked enough to swallow his boot soles, past the calf shed where he had found the litter, and toward the rear of Hawthorne Dairy. In daylight, the place looked less haunted and more ashamed. The milking parlor roof sagged. Alder branches scratched the siding. The old cold storage building sat behind the dairy lane, a low structure with peeling white boards and rusted hinges. The door was secured with a brass padlock bright enough to look rude. Caleb crouched. The lock was new. The hasp was new too, screwed into old wood that had split around it. In the mud were tire tracks, partly washed by rain but still clear. A heavy truck had come through after the storm. Raven pressed her nose to the bottom of the door. Then she scratched once. Caleb put his palm against the boards. No vibration from inside. No movement. He called Sheriff Tom Whitaker, who answered with the tired breath of a man who already suspected he would not like the conversation. Do not open it, Tom said. I did not say I would. Your silence said you were considering it. My silence gets blamed for many things. Tom explained that Hawthorne's ownership was tangled between the bank, an old equipment lease, and county records that had not aged gracefully. Entering without authority could ruin whatever Caleb thought he had found. Go home, Tom said. Caleb looked at Raven. She had stopped scratching and now sat before the locked door, staring at the seam where rainwater bled through the wood. I heard you. That is not agreement. It is what you get today. He ended the call, but he did not move. Raven lowered herself into the wet grass, injured paw tucked beneath her, eyes fixed on the door, as if someone behind it had once promised to come back. The next morning in Coos Bay arrived with rain fine as breath, the kind that did not fall loudly, but made every surface damp enough to accuse. Caleb drove into town under a sky the color of old tin, leaving Raven at Cedar Ridge with the puppies and with Claire's instructions taped to the refrigerator in handwriting that looked like a legal threat. Megan Harris lived behind a feed store near the waterfront in a narrow house painted a faded yellow that might once have been cheerful before salt air took a personal interest. Caleb had passed the building for years without noticing the green door at the alley. That bothered him. He noticed machinery out of rhythm, fence wire gone slack, a truck engine firing one cylinder late. People were harder. He knocked. After a delay, the door opened on a woman with sandy blonde hair cut just above her shoulders, brass-framed glasses, and a pencil tucked behind one ear. She was 46, compact, neat, and wearing a gray cardigan over a blue shirt buttoned to the throat. Caleb Mercer, she said. I wondered how long it would take before someone sent you. No one sent me. That is what people say when they arrive carrying someone else's problem. The problem has 4 legs. Megan looked past him into the alley, then back at his face. You should come in before Mrs. Alvarez sees you and decides I have started doing taxes for ghosts. Her office was the back half of the house, lined with file cabinets labeled by year, not by client. The room smelled of paper coffee and the faint, sweet dust of feed grain drifting through the shared wall. A small electric heater hummed under the desk. Caleb explained Raven, the chip, Linda Caldwell, and the new lock on the cold storage building. Megan listened without interrupting. That made him uncomfortable. Most people filled silence when they thought his hearing loss had made things awkward. Megan treated silence as furniture already in the room. When he finished, she removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Hawthorne Dairy began failing before Linda left. Milk prices fell, feed rose. 2 storms damaged the low barn, and then there were insurance claims involving respiratory illness in the herd. You handled her books? For a time. Her mouth tightened. And then I handled fewer books for fewer people, because I asked why some records did not agree with other records. She opened a laptop. I cannot show you private client files. Do not ask. If you ask, I will say no, and then dislike you for making me perform virtue before breakfast. I did not ask. You were about to. Caleb considered denying it. He decided she would know. Megan worked through public filings, auction notices, state brand inspection summaries, and old insurance notices that had become part of regulatory records. Her fingers moved quickly. The screen filled with numbers, dates, animal identification tags. Caleb could rebuild a pump by touch in poor light, but numbers in columns had always seemed to him like fences viewed from a helicopter. Megan saw where they sagged. Here, she said. This Holstein heifer was listed in a claim after the flood 2 winters ago. Reported destroyed. She opened another document. 6 weeks later, the same identification number appears in a sale lot in Roseburg. Could be a duplicate tag? Yes. She clicked again. And this one? Another number, another date. Still possible. And these? 5 more entries appeared, each small enough to dismiss alone, together too orderly to ignore. Caleb leaned closer. The heater clicked. Rain tapped the window. Why did nobody act? Megan smiled without humor. Nobody is a large word. I noticed. Linda noticed. A few people almost noticed, and then remembered they had loans, sick calves, roofs to repair, and premiums they could not risk delaying. She told him about Dale Foster, the local insurance representative who had spent nearly 2 decades becoming useful. Dale attended funerals, remembered birthdays, delivered feed in storms, and explained deductibles to widows without making them feel foolish. When Megan brought him discrepancies, he did not threaten her. He smiled. He told her agriculture was not a laboratory. Animals moved, tags failed, paperwork arrived late, emergencies required adjustments. He also warned that aggressive questions might trigger audits and slow payments to families who could not survive another month. After that, Megan said, clients began leaving. Quietly. One at a time. No one wanted to be the person who hurt a neighbor by insisting a number behave itself. Before Caleb could answer, the door from the feed store banged open. Ruth Gallagher appeared with her cane, 2 invoices and rain shining on her hat. Megan, if that mineral supplement went up again, I'm going to start feeding my cows inspirational pamphlets. She saw Caleb. Her eyes narrowed with immediate interest. Well, this room has become more expensive. Megan shut the laptop halfway. We are discussing public records. That is the phrase people use when gossip puts on church shoes. Caleb told Ruth enough. Raven, The lock. Linda Caldwell's name. Ruth's humor drained from her face. She lowered herself into a chair without being invited. That cold storage was never locked when Linda had Hawthorne. She kept vaccine coolers in there and complained about mice like they had formed a committee. Megan looked at Ruth. Your premiums increased after the flood years, didn't they? 34% over 3 renewals. Dale said the whole region had been reclassified. Elevated mortality risk. Ruth tapped her cane once. He brought me a casserole when I buried my husband, so I tried very hard not to imagine hitting him with it. Megan opened another public notice.
Regional risk calculations can be affected by claim frequency and severity. Caleb watched the two women build a bridge out of facts and suspicion. He had come about a dog. The dog had led him to a locked door. The locked door had led him here to a room where numbers were beginning to breathe. Ruth leaned toward the screen. If false claims helped a few farms who paid for that help, Megan did not answer at once. She did not need to. Caleb thought of Raven dragging herself through sleet, carrying a name no one had bothered to protect. The question widened. Ruth stood slower now. People will talk to me, she said. Some because they trust me. Some because they are afraid I will stand on their porch until I become weather. Megan almost smiled. Caleb felt his phone buzz. A message from Claire. Puppy's up. Raven angry at thermometer. Good sign. He should have felt relieved. Instead, he watched Megan scroll farther down the list. Her face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. What? He asked. She turned the laptop so he could see. Among the old flood claims under the same period that had nearly ruined Hawthorne was Cedar Ridge Dairy. The claimant line carried his father's name. Elijah Mercer. Megan's voice was quiet. Caleb, I would prefer your father not be in these records. Wind came hard off the bay the following day, bending the grass around Hawthorne Dairy until every blade pointed inland. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from the gutters and ran down the cracked lane in silver threads, carrying bits of alder leaf and old straw toward the ditch. Sheriff Tom Whitaker arrived in a county SUV that had seen better paint and worse roads. He was 62, with a white mustache, tired eyes, and the slow walk of a man who had spent too many years stepping into other people's trouble with an official hat. Behind him came the bank's property manager, a narrow man in a tan coat, and Claire Bennett, with a medical case she did not need, but had brought because Claire disliked standing anywhere empty-handed. Caleb had Raven on a short lead. She walked better now, though the bandaged paw made her steps uneven. Her attention did not waver from the cold storage building. Tom held up one hand before Caleb could speak. I checked the parcel records. The bank controls the structure. No active lease. No authorization for a new lock. So we open it. We open it correctly, Tom said. That word saves many headaches. The property manager signed a form on the hood of Tom's SUV, complaining about moisture on the paper, as if Oregon had made a poor administrative choice. Tom photographed the door, the lock, the screws, the tire tracks still visible beneath the eave where rain had not washed them away. Caleb stood back because Olivia Grant, a lawyer he had not yet met but already suspected would scare him, had told Tom over the phone that nobody with emotional involvement should touch anything before it was documented. Caleb did not like being described accurately. Tom cut the lock. The sound reached Caleb as a hard metallic snap through his right side. Raven lunged once, then froze. The door stuck before it opened, swollen by damp, and when Tom pulled it wide, the smell came out in a slow, cold breath. Rust. Mold. Old feed. Something sharper beneath chemical and stale. Claire wrinkled her nose. Well, that is unpleasant in several categories.
Your professional opinion? Caleb asked. My professional opinion is that barns should stop having secrets. The interior was dim lit by gray daylight through a narrow window filmed with dirt. Shelves lined one wall. Broken vaccine coolers sat near the back. Feed sacks had been torn open by mice, their contents clumped and sour. Caleb noticed tracks in the dust on the concrete. Not animal tracks. Boot marks layered over older grime. Someone had been here recently. Tom saw them too. He took photographs. Raven ignored the shelves. She pulled toward a stack of pallets covered with a blue tarp. Caleb almost held her back, then felt the difference in the lead. Not excitement. Insistence. Tom nodded once. Caleb lifted the tarp with 2 fingers, while Claire shone a flashlight. Beneath it were banker boxes softened by damp, a coil of cable,
Plastic livestock ear tags, bundled in rubber bands, and a clipboard whose top sheet had curled at the corners.
Megan Harris arrived 10 minutes later, breathless and irritated by mud on her shoes. Ruth Gallagher came with her, leaning on the cane and announcing that if anyone tried to send her home, she would become a permanent fixture. Tom started to object. Ruth looked at him. He chose health. Megan put on gloves before touching a box. These are copies, she said, flipping through veterinary treatment forms. Some from Hawthorne, some from other farms. Claire leaned beside her. I signed this treatment record. For an animal listed as destroyed 4 weeks earlier. Claire's face hardened. No, I did not sign a ghost. Tom bagged the document. Caleb stayed near Raven. His hands wanted work. Work kept anger from becoming words. Raven nosed the floor beside the pallets, then scratched at the edge of a warped plywood sheet.
Beneath it was a shallow cavity cut between 2 raised sections of concrete, old and deliberate. Tom lifted the sheet. Inside sat a metal cookie tin spotted with rust, but dry. He opened it carefully. On top lay a photograph of Linda Caldwell in a denim jacket, silver hair pulled back, one hand resting on the head of a younger Raven. The dog wore the copper bird tag. In the photograph, Raven's ears were both upright, and her eyes were bright with the stern confidence of a worker who knew every gate on the place. Under the photograph were folded papers, a small brass whistle, and a handwritten complaint addressed to the county sheriff's office. Tom's breath changed. Caleb looked at him. You know it. Tom did not answer immediately. He unfolded the complaint with gloved hands. Linda had written about animals reported as dead after the flood, though she had seen some loaded onto Monroe livestock trucks. She did not accuse anyone outright. She asked for help reconciling records she said had been altered without her consent. Attached were tag numbers, treatment dates, and a note about Dale Foster telling her that stress could make good people misremember routine paperwork. Megan's mouth tightened. Ruth said a word unsuitable for church, but useful for the room. Deeper in one box, they found shipping slips from Monroe Livestock, some with roots scratched out and rewritten. A bank deposit record listed consulting payments to Dale Foster's agency. Nothing alone was a thunderclap. Together, the papers began to sound like weather moving in. Caleb told himself to breathe through his nose. Then Megan stopped turning pages. She looked at Tom. Tom looked at Caleb. That was how Caleb knew before he saw it. A photocopy of an insurance claim sat between 2 Hawthorne folders. Cedar Ridge Dairy, flood-related livestock loss. 12 head listed as destroyed. At the bottom was Elijah Mercer's signature, black and strong. The way Caleb remembered it. From Check's birthday cards and notes left on tractor seats with no please attached. Caleb reached for the paper. Tom stopped him gently. Copy, Tom said. Still evidence. Caleb pulled his hand back. His fingers curled anyway. My father would not have hidden cattle.
Nobody spoke. That was worse than argument. Megan turned the page over. On the back, written in blue ink by someone else, were 10 words. Eli knows enough. Do not let his son see this first. The room seemed to tilt. Raven pressed her shoulder against Caleb's leg. He felt the weight. He wanted to step away from it. Instead, the dog leaned harder, and the old cold storage building held its breath around him.
By midweek, the sky over Coos County cleared to a pale winter blue that made every puddle look deeper than it was. Cedar Ridge smelled of wet pasture wood smoke and the faint, warm milk scent of puppies growing faster than Caleb believed reasonable. Inside the cabin, Raven had taken command of the crate, the hearth, 2 towels, 1 bootlace, and a dishcloth she treated as if it had sentimental value. Outside the cabin, the investigation gathered itself into something harder to ignore. Megan Harris worked from her back office with 3 monitors, 2 legal pads, and the controlled fury of a woman who had been called difficult for telling numbers they could not wander off unsupervised. Claire Bennett came and went with veterinary files she was legally permitted to share and a thermos of coffee strong enough to strip paint. Ruth Gallagher brought names. That was her gift. She knew who had sold cows in quiet panic, who had taken premium increases as punishment from God or bad luck, Who trusted the sheriff, who distrusted anyone with a clipboard, and who might open a door if Ruth stood on the porch long enough to become a weather event.
Caleb drove them where the roads were bad and listened more than he spoke. At one dairy outside Myrtle Point, a farmer showed Megan renewal notices that had risen until he sold half his herd and still owed money. At another, a widow admitted Dale Foster had helped her receive a payout when her barn roof collapsed, and she refused to call him crooked because he had sat at her kitchen table while she cried. "I do not need him to be a monster," Megan said softly. "I need the records to show what else he did." That answer opened more doors than anger would have. Caleb watched it happen and felt his own judgment shift in uncomfortable increments. Dale had been useful. That was part of the trap. Useful men could hide in gratitude. Useful men could make a community feel cruel for asking who paid the bill.
Olivia Grant entered the work like a clean knife. She was 55, with black hair cut in a precise bob, a silver streak at one temple, and a charcoal coat that seemed immune to weather.
She met Caleb, Megan, Tom, and Claire at the county records room and laid out rules before sitting down. No stolen records, no private client files without consent, no amateur interrogations, no dramatic accusations in diners. Ruth, who had invited herself, raised her hand. "What about accurate remarks in church parking lots?" Olivia looked at her. "Preferably no." That was not a firm no. "Mrs. Gallagher, I bill by the hour." Ruth lowered her hand. Olivia reviewed the Hawthorne documents, the Monroe shipping slips, the duplicate tags, and the Cedar Ridge claim. She did not soften her words for Caleb. "If your father's claim was false and Cedar Ridge benefited, there may be financial exposure for the current owner." "How much?" he asked. "That is the wrong first question."
It is the question I have. The better one is whether you want the truth only until it reaches your fence. Caleb looked away first. The old military part of him hated that. The honest part knew he had done it.
The next afternoon, Dale Foster came to Cedar Ridge. He arrived in a clean, dark truck, stepped carefully around the mud, and carried a sack of puppy food under one arm like a peace offering. He was 58, broad-faced, neat, with silver at his temples, and the warm manner of a man who had spent years entering kitchens during bad seasons. Raven met him at the door with her ears forward and her body between him and the crate. Dale smiled gently. "That's a good mother." Caleb did not invite him in. "What do you want?" Dale adjusted the sack in his arms. "To talk before this becomes uglier than it needs to be." Rainwater dripped from the porch roof between them. "It is already ugly." "Then before it becomes destructive." Your father was a good man, Caleb. He loved this land.
He was under pressure most people never saw. Caleb's jaw tightened. Dale noticed. He lowered his voice. There are ways to handle old paperwork. Correct quietly. Protect people who made decisions in desperate times. No one needs to drag Elijah's name across a public floor. The sentence found the old bruise with practiced aim. Caleb saw his father in the main barn 3 years earlier, hand gripping a gate, saying, "You think leaving makes you honest?" He heard himself answer, "And you think staying makes you right?" Neither had apologized before death made the argument permanent. Dale held out the food. "For the pups." Raven growled low. Caleb could not hear much of it, but he felt the boards under his boots carry the vibration. "Keep it." Dale's smile changed by one small degree. "You may think this is courage. Sometimes it is only pride wearing a cleaner shirt." Caleb stepped closer. "You should leave." Dale did, but not before looking past him into the cabin at the puppies, at the old walls, at everything Caleb could lose. That evening, Megan sent a clearer scan of the Cedar Ridge claim. 12 head listed as destroyed. Caleb knew enough of the old herd records to remember that flood. He had been overseas then, calling home on poor connections, while Elijah told him the lower pasture was a mess, but manageable. The scan carried his father's signature and Dale Foster's certification beneath it. Caleb set the phone face down. Across the room, Raven lifted her head. The puppies nursed in a warm, blind heap. Caleb looked toward the dark shape of the main house beyond the cabin window. Elijah's office had been locked since the funeral. Dust could wait. Grief could wait. Paper did not rot as quickly as courage. He told himself he would open the house in the morning. Then he sat very still, not moving toward the key. Night settled over Cedar Ridge with a hard frost that silvered the pasture and made the old fence wire shine under the porch light. The wind dropped after sunset, leaving the ranch in the kind of quiet that made Caleb too aware of the spaces his left ear could not cross. He did not go to the main house. He told himself the light was poor, the paperwork could wait, the puppies needed watching, Raven's bandage needed checking. All true, not the truth. He moved through chores with clipped precision, then sat in the chair beside the stove and removed his hearing device, because the small, amplified noises of the cabin had begun to scrape at him. Silence closed around him with familiar pressure. Raven lay beside the puppy pen, her dark back curved around the 5 small bodies. The largest male twitched in sleep. The smallest female had wedged her head beneath her mother's elbow, as if determined to burrow into victory. Caleb should have smiled. Instead, he stared at the wall where an old photograph of Elijah Mercer hung crooked above a shelf. In it, Elijah stood near the milking barn at 60 broad-faced, sun-darkened iron gray hair flattened by a cap, one hand on a heifer's halter and the other hooked into his belt. He looked annoyed at being photographed, which was how Caleb remembered him looking when feelings came too close to the surface. Good man. Hard man. Proud man. Those categories had once seemed separate. Now they overlapped until Caleb could not see where one ended. He fell asleep without meaning to. Sometime after midnight, pressure struck his chest. Caleb opened his eyes. Raven stood over him with one paw planted against his shirt. Her mouth moved. He heard nothing. She stepped down, seized the edge of his blanket in her teeth, and pulled. "What?" His own voice sounded far away inside his skull. Raven ran toward the hallway, then back, then toward the puppy pen. Caleb sat up too fast and banged his knee against the coffee table. A dull pain flashed up his leg. Then he smelled smoke. Thin, bitter, wrong.
He grabbed his hearing device from the side table but did not waste time putting it on. Smoke had gathered near the ceiling, a gray smear spreading from the stovepipe. The firebox was closed. The problem was draft. Caleb opened the front door and 2 windows, cold air knifing through the room. He lifted the puppy pen with both hands, awkward and heavy, and carried it into the mudroom where the air was cleaner. Raven stayed between him and the litter, moving with controlled panic, her injured paw thumping the floor. Outside, Caleb climbed the ladder with a roof rake and boots that slipped twice on the frosted rungs. His breath smoked white. Ice had packed around the chimney cap, sealing the vent beneath the crust left by freezing rain. He broke it loose in chunks. The first slab slid down the roof and shattered near the porch.
The second hit his shoulder.
He kept working until smoke began to pull upward again. By the time he came back inside, his hands shook. Not from cold. Raven sat beside the puppies, ears high, eyes fixed on him. Caleb crouched in front of her. "You woke me." She touched her nose to his wrist. Gratitude did not arrive like warmth. It arrived as discomfort. He had carried Raven from a storm. Now she had dragged him out of a silence that could have killed him. Being needed had always made sense. Needing in return felt like standing without armor. He checked each puppy, restarted the stove after clearing the pipe, and did not sleep again. Near dawn, with frost still hard on the grass, Caleb took the brass key from the drawer and walked to the main house. The building stood 80 yards from the cabin, larger, colder, its white paint weathered gray along the porch rails. He had grown up inside those walls and had avoided them with adult discipline since Elijah's funeral. The lock resisted, then turned. The air inside smelled of cedar shavings, old leather dust, and the faint sourness of rooms kept closed too long. Caleb moved through the kitchen without turning on the overhead light. His boots sounded too loud even to him. Elijah's office waited at the back, behind a door with a glass pane. The desk was exactly as Caleb remembered, invoices stacked, square pens and a coffee mug, a framed photograph of Caleb in dress whites shoved half behind a lamp as if pride needed hiding. Under the shelves sat 3 banker boxes. The first held tax returns, the second equipment receipts and breeding records. In the third, beneath insurance statements, he found letters from Dale Foster's agency. Premium overdue, coverage at risk, extension denied, then extension granted. A flood claim summary. A payment large enough to bring Cedar Ridge current for another season. Caleb sat down because his legs had stopped being useful.
At the bottom of the box was an envelope addressed to Sheriff Tom Whitaker.
It had never been sealed. Inside was a letter in Elijah's blocky hand. Caleb read slowly. His father wrote that after the flood, 12 cattle had been exposed, but only 4 died. Dale told him the insurer could list the whole exposed group as destroyed under emergency disease risk. Wade Monroe would remove the survivors. The larger payment would save Cedar Ridge from foreclosure and keep Caleb's inheritance intact. Elijah wrote that he told himself no animal would be wasted, that insurance companies survived losses bigger than his whole life, that a temporary lie could protect something permanent. Then premiums rose across the county. Other farms struggled. Linda Caldwell began asking questions. The last paragraph wandered. "I keep saying I did it to save the land for Caleb, though my son never asked me to save it this way." The sentence ended there. No signature. No confession beyond exhaustion.
No request for forgiveness.
Caleb read it until the words blurred. He had wanted his father to be innocent or guilty in a clean way. A victim could be defended, a villain could be rejected. Elijah was neither. He had been a frightened man who loved his land, resented his son for leaving, and accepted a lie because it arrived dressed as mercy. A scrape sounded at the doorway, or maybe Caleb felt it through the floor. Raven stood there, having pushed the office door wider with her nose. She did not enter until he lowered one hand. Then she crossed the room and sat beside his chair. Caleb rested his palm on the warm ridge of her shoulder while morning light reached the desk, touching the unsigned letter and the claim that bore his father's name. One showed what Elijah had done. The other showed he had known.
Morning rain returned to Coos Bay in thin gray bands, soft enough to look harmless from a window, and cold enough to numb fingers on a steering wheel. Caleb drove into town with Elijah's document box strapped in the passenger seat and Raven in the back, her head lifted between the front seats as if she had been appointed legal supervision. He arrived at Megan Harris's green alley door 12 minutes before the feed truck, which Megan noticed immediately. She opened the door in a blue sweater with 2 pencils pinned through her hair at conflicting angles. "You are blocking the delivery lane." Caleb lifted the steel box. "I was wrong." Megan looked at him over her glasses. "That sentence often comes with a tail attached." "No tail." "What were you wrong about?" He understood the demand. A vague apology let a man preserve too much of himself. "I accused you of using my father to make your case stronger. You followed the records. I blamed you because I did not want them to lead where they led." Megan stood still long enough for cold rain to run down the back of his collar. "That was almost properly done." "Almost? You are still blocking the delivery lane." He moved the truck. Olivia Grant arrived an hour later, black coat dry, despite weather that had soaked everyone else, and began with process rather than sympathy. She photographed the box, wrote down where Caleb had found it, asked who had touched the papers, and raised one eyebrow when Caleb mentioned Raven entering the office. "Did Raven alter any documents?" "No." "Then Raven is presently my least concerning witness." Megan turned away, but Caleb saw the smile. Olivia read Elijah's unfinished letter without comment. When she finished, she placed both hands flat on the table. "This helps establish knowledge. It may also expose Cedar Ridge to recovery claims. If we owe it, I will pay it." "You understand the moral sentence," Olivia said. "I am discussing the legal one." Caleb looked at the box. He thought of the crane lift in the old machine shed, the outer pasture, the tools he had kept alive by stubbornness long after sensible people would have replaced them. "I understand enough." "No," Olivia said, not unkindly, "but you understand the direction." Sheriff Tom Whitaker brought his own burden that afternoon. He arrived with a photocopy of Linda Caldwell's complaint and a face that had aged since Caleb last saw him. "She sent this 6 months before Hawthorne went under," Tom said. "I forwarded it to the state insurance regulator. They said it looked contractual and asked for supporting records." "And then?" Caleb asked. Tom removed his hat. "Then wildfire season hit. 2 valleys evacuated, livestock loose on county roads. 3 deputies covering territory meant for twice that. I called Linda once, no answer. Then I let it become somebody else's responsibility." No one spoke. The office heater clicked. Tom did not ask forgiveness. That gave the admission weight.
"People think failure is always a decision," he said. "Sometimes it is the thing you do not return to." Olivia added his statement to the file. Through legal channels, she contacted the attorney who had handled part of Linda Caldwell's bankruptcy. 2 days later, Linda agreed to a video call. Caleb set the laptop on his kitchen table because Raven had become restless the moment the speaker crackled. Linda appeared on screen from a small room with pale walls and Oregon rain streaking the window behind her. She was 67, slight, with silver hair cut short around a long, tired face. A blue cardigan hung loosely from her shoulders. Before anyone asked a question, she said, "Show me the dog." Caleb turned the laptop. Raven, who had been near the puppy pen, rose so sharply that one ear struck the table leg. "Raven," Linda said. The shepherd walked to the screen. Her nose touched the glass. Then she moved around the table.
Searching behind the laptop, came back, touched the screen again, and hurried to the front door. She waited there, ears forward, as if Linda's voice meant Linda's body must be outside in the rain. Linda covered her mouth. For several seconds, the call held only breathing. Caleb carried the laptop to the floor. Raven lay beside it, pressed close to a woman made of light and sound. Linda explained that after Hawthorne failed, she had suffered what she called a collapse of practical function. She stopped sleeping, missed appointments, and was hospitalized after being found in her truck outside a closed bank office. Ben Wallace, a cattle hand who had worked at Hawthorne, took Raven. He sent photographs for months. Raven by the pens, Raven in his truck, Raven guarding calves. Linda believed she was safe. Then Ben moved to another ranch farther inland, and Linda's new housing did not allow large dogs. "I told myself she was loved," Linda said. "That was the only way I could stand it." Claire arranged a call with Ben's rehabilitation facility. He appeared propped against pillows, 56 sandy gray hair flattened on one side, body hollowed by months of healing. A ranch gate had crushed his pelvis. He confirmed that Raven had been with him, and that she became pregnant after an unplanned mating with another German Shepherd on the property. Before he could arrange care for the litter, he went to the hospital. The manager promised to keep her. He did not. A temporary worker later told Ben that Raven had been driven near Hawthorne and released because, in the manager's words, a working dog could survive if she had old ground to return to. Ben looked into the camera. "I did not know until after she was gone." Raven stared at the screen, not understanding confession, understanding only voice. "Did you ever see Monroe trucks at Hawthorne after Linda left?" Megan asked. Ben nodded slowly. "Wade's rigs. Late sometimes. I thought they were hauling old equipment." Olivia wrote the dates he remembered. Then Ben paused. "There was one night, the week after the flood claim at Cedar Ridge. I remember because Elijah Mercer came by Hawthorne the next morning looking like he had swallowed gravel." Caleb's hand tightened on the table edge. Ben closed his eyes, searching memory. "I can give you the date." The library in downtown Coos Bay smelled of damp coats, floor polish, and old paper doing its best to outlive everybody. Rain tapped against the high windows of the upstairs meeting room while Caleb stood near the back wall, Raven at his side, and watched Rachel Cole grip her phone with both hands as if it might try to escape. Rachel was 41, small, with dark curls cut close to her jaw and a nervous habit of checking the door after every sound in the hallway. She had worked as a dispatcher for Monroe Livestock until 8 months earlier. Ruth Gallagher had found her by methods she refused to describe, beyond saying, "People answer the phone when you already know what pie they bring to funerals." Olivia Grant did not approve of that sentence but accepted the result. Rachel sat at the end of the table across from Megan, Olivia, Claire, Tom, and Caleb. "I did not steal company files," she said before anyone asked. "I have my own calendar, screenshots sent to my phone, notes I made because I wanted proof I was not remembering things wrong." That last part changed the room. Caleb had heard men talk like that after being told their memory was unreliable enough times to make reality feel negotiable. Megan's expression softened, not with pity, but recognition. "Show us what you are comfortable showing," Olivia said. Rachel opened a folder on her phone. Messages from Wade Monroe appeared, some late at night, some with route numbers that did not match the official dispatch system. Temporary tag list. Use Southgate. No paperwork at pickup. Roseburg Yard, not North Bend. Hold invoice until Dale clears. Claire leaned in when animal identifiers appeared. "These tags connect to treatment records." Megan began matching dates to claim filings. Caleb watched the pattern form the way he might watch fog lift from a field, slowly, then all at once. Trucks moved after dark from farms with pending insurance claims. Some animals listed as destroyed appeared later in sale or treatment records. Dale's agency certified losses. Monroe Livestock handled removals. The payments were small enough to hide an ordinary hardship, large enough to keep certain families afloat, and costly enough to raise premiums for everyone else. Wade told me certain clients required discretion, Rachel said. When I asked why the routes were not entered normally, he said I was paid to schedule trucks, not invent weather. She swallowed. Then he started checking my work like I was slow. I left before he could make me believe it. Ruth reached across the table and patted Rachel's wrist with 2 fingers, the closest thing to gentleness she seemed willing to perform in public. That afternoon, Raven led Caleb back to Hawthorne. The sky cleared for a narrow hour, bright winter light slicing through the alder branches and turning every wet board silver. Tom came with them, and so did Ben Wallace by video call held in Claire's hand, because he was not yet strong enough to travel. Raven entered the cold storage building with a focus that made even Tom stop talking. She passed the boxes already cataloged, sniffed the base of an old metal cabinet, and scratched the right front leg. Ben's voice crackled through the phone. Linda kept spare tags in a cabinet. For replacements, bottom drawer stuck. Caleb looked at Tom. Tom photographed the cabinet before touching it. The drawer resisted, then shrieked open. Inside were old tag bundles, a rusted screwdriver, a roll of twine, and a waterproof pouch wedged beneath a tray. The pouch held tag records in Linda's hand, careful and dated. Megan matched 3 numbers to animals declared dead in regional claims. Claire matched 2 more to vaccine records after their supposed destruction. The evidence did not solve everything. It did something more useful. It gave investigators a path that could survive being challenged. Sunday brought the strangest conversation. Caleb went to church because Ruth had informed him that a man about to testify against his own father's silence could use a pew, and because arguing with Ruth before coffee was foolish. The sanctuary was small, white-walled, smelling faintly of candle wax and wet wool. Caleb sat in the back, where he could watch faces. Raven stayed at home with the puppies, though Caleb suspected she would have behaved better than half the congregation. After service, people gathered under the covered walkway, shaking umbrellas and avoiding the kind of eye contact that invited truth. Dale Foster approached Caleb near the bulletin board. He wore a charcoal overcoat and a blue tie, his hair combed neatly, his face arranged in sorrow. "Your father came to me scared," Dale said. Caleb turned so his right ear faced him. He was about to lose everything. Men do not think clearly when land that carried their family is at risk. "You helped him lie." I helped him survive.
Dale's voice stayed low, almost kind. A good father sometimes signs an ugly paper so his child does not freeze outside the door. Caleb looked at the churchyard beyond the walkway, at rainwater dripping from bare maple branches, at Ruth pretending not to listen from 6 feet away while listening with her entire body. "Did you say that to my father before or after you calculated what everyone else would pay?" Dale's face did not collapse. He was too practiced for that. But the warmth left his eyes for half a second, and Caleb saw the machinery behind it. "Be careful," Dale said. "With what?" "With believing truth makes you clean." Caleb stepped closer. The old anger rose fast, looking for a place to stand. Then he thought of Raven pressing her nose to a computer screen, Linda whispering a name she thought she had lost, Rachel saving messages so she would not doubt her own mind, and Elijah leaving a letter he had not been brave enough to send.
"I do not need clean," Caleb said. "I need finished." Dale's smile returned, thinner now. "Then I suppose we will see what people prefer when your father's name is read aloud." He walked away, through the rain-polished shoes, avoiding the mud. Ruth came to Caleb's side. "I wanted to hit him with a hymnal." "That would be frowned on." Depends on the hymn. The morning of the public review broke clear over Coos Bay, cold and bright enough to make every windshield in the county administration parking lot flare like a sheet of water. Rain from the night before had frozen along the curb, and people crossed carefully, heads lowered, not yet from shame, but because the day itself was difficult to look at. Caleb parked behind the building and sat with both hands on the wheel. Raven was not with him. He had considered bringing her, then decided against it. She had already carried enough of other people's failures. She did not need to lie under a table while those failures were translated into official language. At Cedar Ridge, Claire's assistant watched Raven and the puppies. Caleb wore a pale blue shirt under a charcoal wool coat, boots cleaned as well as boots that knew livestock could be cleaned, and a fresh battery in his hearing device. 2 spares rested in a small case in his pocket. He carried Elijah's letter in a document folder Olivia had prepared, sealed, labeled, and treated with more ceremony than Caleb felt he deserved. The hearing room was not a courtroom. No jury waited. No judge sat high above them. The County Agricultural Commission had authority to hear testimony, refer evidence, request suspension proceedings, and make recommendations to state regulators. It could not put Dale Foster or Wade Monroe in handcuffs. The distinction mattered, legally. Emotionally, the room ignored it. Ranchers filled the benches. Some had benefited from Dale's help. Some had paid higher premiums because of it. Some had suspected pieces of the truth and chosen silence because a neighbor's rescue can look noble when you do not see the bill. Megan sat at the front with binders arranged by year. Olivia sat beside her, still as a closed blade. Ruth took a seat near the aisle with her cane resting across her knees. "What's that for?" Caleb asked. Discouraging interruption. Dale Foster entered with his attorney, wearing a charcoal suit, polished brown shoes, and a navy tie. He paused twice to shake hands. People accepted. That mattered. Wade Monroe arrived separately in a dark jacket too tight through the shoulders, jaw set, eyes avoiding Rachel Cole. The commission chair opened with careful language, no personal attacks, no finding of criminal guilt. All testimony entered into the record, all referrals made to appropriate authorities. Careful language did not make the room careful. Dale's attorney spoke about agriculture as an imperfect system serving an unpredictable world. Floods came, disease moved, tags failed, paperwork lagged behind weather. Then Dale asked to speak. He stood with both hands on the table and looked not at the commission, but at the people behind him. "You know me," he said. "You know I have spent 18 years helping families survive seasons that looked impossible in October." He named a barn roof collapse, a widowed dairy owner whose claim he had carried through appeal, a calf pneumonia outbreak where emergency funds kept feed on the property. No one disputed these stories. That was their power. Dale lowered his voice. Were adjustments made during crisis? Yes. Were records sometimes corrected after the fact? Yes. But I reject the idea that compassion should be criminalized by people who read rural hardship from a spreadsheet. Murmurs moved through the benches. Caleb watched an older farmer nod once. Dale's gaze found him. Is a number more sacred than a family's home? Megan rose later with no drama at all. She did not try to be warm. She did not try to be charming. She placed the regional risk charts on the screen and showed how inflated claims increased risk classifications across Coos County. She explained that when losses were overstated, the cost did not vanish into the air. It returned as premiums, exclusions delayed renewals, and tighter terms for farms that had never signed any false claim. Dale's attorney objected that she implied causation where there might be correlation. Megan adjusted her glasses. I am showing the commission the insurer's own regional calculations and the dates those classifications changed. She clicked to the next slide. The question is not whether desperate families deserved help.
The question is who was forced to pay for help they never agreed to provide. The room quieted. Ruth leaned toward Caleb. Numbers brought a shovel. Rachel testified next. Her hands shook when she took the oath, but her voice held. She identified messages from Wade instructing her to schedule pickups outside the standard system, use temporary tag lists, and direct trucks to sale yards beyond ordinary routes. Wade's attorney asked whether she personally inspected the cattle. No. Whether she saw Wade replace tags? No. Then you cannot confirm those animals were the same animals in the insurance claims. Rachel looked at Wade. No. That is why I kept asking why the routes were hidden, Claire testified with less emotion and more damage. She matched treatment records to animals listed as destroyed, explaining every limitation before anyone could use one against her. Duplicate tags were possible. Clerical errors happened. But not this often, the commission chair said. Claire nodded. Not always in the same financial direction. Tom Whitaker stood with his hat in both hands and admitted he had forwarded Linda Caldwell's complaint but failed to pursue it. He mentioned wildfire season and staffing shortages, then refused to let them become shelter. I decided another emergency was louder, he said. I was wrong. Linda appeared by video from her small room, silver hair, neat blue cardigan buttoned. She described being asked to approve numbers she knew were false. She described Dale telling her stress could make good people confused. She said he did not sound cruel. He made doubt sound like concern. By the time Hawthorne failed, even she had begun checking the same figures until the page swam. Dale's attorney asked about her hospitalization. Linda leaned toward the camera. My health failed after months of being told what I could prove was not real. It did not create the numbers. Then Caleb's name was called. The hearing device amplified every scrape of chair, every cough, every restless boot. He resisted the urge to remove it. Olivia had told him to answer only what was asked. Instead, the chair allowed a short statement. Caleb unfolded the insurance certification bearing Elijah Mercer's signature. My father signed this, he said. The room shifted. Many people had known Elijah. 12 cattle were reported destroyed. 4 died. The others were removed and later sold. Dale's attorney rose, but Caleb continued only when permitted. He entered Elijah's unfinished letter into the record. He did not make his father a helpless victim. He described the overdue premiums, the foreclosure threat, and Dale's offer to enlarge the claim. Then he said the part that cost him. My father knew the report was false. He signed it anyway. The words did not destroy Elijah as Caleb had feared. They made him human. Dale stood abruptly. Would you have preferred he lose everything? The chair warned him, but the question hung in the room, waiting for Caleb to answer in front of people who had respected his father. The hearing room held its breath while winter light poured through the county windows and turned dust in the air into small drifting sparks. Caleb stood with Elijah's letter on the table before him, Dale Foster's question still hanging between the rows of ranchers. Would you have preferred he lose everything? It was a cruel question, because it was not empty. Caleb could see the old Cedar Ridge as Elijah had seen it, the milking barn full, the lower pasture green in May, the family name painted on the feed truck, the son who had gone to war and might one day come home to land that had survived for him. Caleb could also see Linda Caldwell, alone in a bank parking lot, Megan losing clients one quiet account at a time, Ruth choosing which bill could wait, and Raven dragging herself through sleet after people used and abandoned what they found convenient. He looked at Dale. I would have preferred he tell me the truth. The answer did not sound heroic. It sounded tired. That made it stronger. Dale's face changed for less than a second. The practiced warmth slipping aside to reveal irritation, then calculation. Caleb continued because stopping would have been easier. Helping one family by quietly charging 10 others is not mercy. It is choosing who suffers and hiding the choice in paperwork. No one applauded. Good. Applause would have made the moment smaller. The commission recessed after 6 hours. When it resumed, state investigators summarized banking records linking unusual consulting payments to Dale's agency and transport payments to Monroe Livestock after disputed claims. The documents did not complete a criminal case in public, but they supported emergency administrative action. Dale maintained that rural adjustments had been mischaracterized by people who did not understand crisis. Wade Monroe denied knowing cattle had been declared dead, claiming he followed hauling instructions provided by clients. Rachel's messages showed him ordering routes outside the standard system. By late afternoon, the Department of Insurance representative announced that Dale's license would be suspended pending formal investigation. Monroe Livestock records would be subpoenaed. The full file would be referred to the state prosecutor. There were no handcuffs, no dramatic confession. Dale gathered his papers with careful hands. Wade left through a side door, shoulders tight beneath his jacket. The ranchers remained seated, as if leaving too quickly might declare a side. Ruth stood with her cane. "Doesn't feel much like winning," she said. Megan closed one binder. "It was not supposed to." Outside, the sun had begun to drop toward the bay, and every footprint in the thin, frozen slush showed clearly. Investigators, attorneys, ranchers, Dale's polished shoes, Wade's heavy boots, Caleb's own prints beside Tom's. There had never been only two sides. There had been fear, usefulness, silence, desperation, kindness, pride, and the small bargains people made when they thought no one else would have to pay. The first refunds arrived 3 weeks later, in envelopes too thin to contain justice. Ruth opened hers at Megan's kitchen table, read the figure twice, and held it toward the window. "Maybe there is a missing zero hiding in the light." "There is not," Megan said. "It won't replace the cows I sold." "No. It won't cover 3 years of me wanting to throw invoices into the bay." "Also no." Ruth folded the letter along its crease. "At least disappointment still arrives with excellent formatting." The state ordered a freeze on new premium increases while an independent review examined past claims. Some farmers received partial refunds. Others were told their files required further review. Civil suits moved slowly in offices far from muddy barns and kitchen tables. Dale and Wade would later face charges related to insurance fraud, falsified records, and obstruction. But charges did not reopen Hawthorne Dairy. They did not restore cattle sold under pressure. They did not give Linda back the years when people called her confused. Truth stopped the harm from continuing unchecked. It did not travel backward through time. Cedar Ridge owed money too. After reviewing Elijah's claim, the insurer agreed to structured repayment instead of immediate seizure, largely because Olivia Grant made mercy and precision sit at the same table until they behaved. Caleb sold the crane lift he used for boat engines and leased an outer pasture to a neighbor with more sheep than judgment. He kept Elijah's belt buckle. Everything else was negotiable. By spring, the first meetings of what would become the South Coast Farm Cooperative took place in Cedar Ridge's old machine shed. They chose it because the courthouse felt too official, the diner too public, and Megan's office could not hold more than 8 adults without violating either fire code or patience. The first meeting nearly ended the idea before it began. One dairy owner wanted group insurance negotiations. A cranberry grower wanted shared drainage equipment. Ruth wanted a snowplow big enough to reach everyone before anyone had time to complain. Megan stood at a plywood table with a pencil in her hair and refused to let them call anything a cooperative until they agreed who owned equipment, who maintained records, and who paid when somebody returned a trailer with a new dent and an old excuse. That sounds like distrust, a farmer said. It is accounting, Megan replied. Distrust is what happens when accounting is absent. They named it South Coast Farm Cooperative after rejecting several alternatives, including Ruth's suggestion, people who finally read the fine print. Claire arranged group vaccination schedules and emergency veterinary coverage. Tom retired in May. 3 days later, he arrived at Cedar Ridge in his personal truck with 2 boxes of forms and a sack of mineral supplements. Retirement means not working, Caleb told him. Tom adjusted his cap. No one is paying me. That is a poor definition. Raven recovered fully. Her coat grew thick over the dark saddle of her back, though the scar around her neck remained visible when the fur shifted. The puppies outgrew the crate, then the pen, then most of Caleb's patience. One male knocked over a water bowl and barked at the spreading puddle as if reporting a crime. Another chewed the corner of Megan's binder and seemed professionally satisfied. By the time spring grass brightened the pasture, Caleb understood that the next hard decision would come wearing paws, ears, and innocent faces. The puppies needed homes, and Raven watched every visitor as if adoption were a legal process she alone had authority to approve. Spring on Cedar Ridge arrived wet green and entirely too optimistic. Grass came up through mud. Alder leaves opened like small hands, and the 5 puppies became all legs, ears, and poorly planned enthusiasm. Raven stood among them with the weary dignity of a mother who had discovered that survival was only the beginning of management. The largest male, broad-chested and serious, learned to sit in front of closed gates and stare until a human felt judged. Caleb named him Ridge before he admitted he was keeping him. The smallest female, the one who had fought for warmth in the first long night, grew into a quick, bright creature with a dark crescent beneath her throat and an alarming talent for appearing exactly where Caleb intended to step. He named her Mercy because Claire said naming a dog after a virtue might encourage him to practice one. Raven approved these choices by placing one paw on the adoption applications Caleb tried to complete for them. That is not a signature, he told her. Raven looked at him until he reconsidered. Claire adopted a pup with uneven ears and the nerve to climb onto her exam table during his own checkup. She named him Harbor, claiming every clinic needed a staff member who could calm nervous animals and defend insurance forms by sleeping on them. Ruth took a sturdy female she named Clover. Within a week, Clover learned which gate Ruth forgot to latch and began sitting in front of it every morning with the expression of an underpaid supervisor. Ben Wallace returned to Cedar Ridge in late summer, using a cane, his gait uneven but determined. Before Caleb released the young male named Finn, Ben provided fencing photographs, veterinary references, a feeding plan, and 3 character witnesses nobody had asked for. Finn recognized his voice from the video calls. The pup hesitated, looked back at Raven, then crossed the yard and pressed against Ben's good leg. Ben put one hand over his eyes. I'm not crying. Ruth, who had come to watch without admitting she cared, said, Nobody accused you, which makes the defense suspicious. Raven inspected Ben, the cane, the truck, and the fencing photographs as if she understood every document. Then she touched Finn's ear with her nose and let him go. Caleb did not call it goodbye. The dogs would meet on cooperative training days, and Raven would continue judging standards across several properties. In autumn, Claire introduced Caleb to Wesley Brooks, a 61-year-old former search and rescue dog trainer with weathered brown skin, a shaved head, and a gray beard cut close under a narrow jaw. Wesley watched dogs more than people, and had the unsettling habit of letting silence stretch until everyone else stopped trying to decorate it. During their first session, a delivery truck came up the lane behind Caleb's left side. He did not hear it. Raven did. She touched her nose to his right hand, then looked toward the road. Wesley's eyes sharpened. You trained that? No. Then she trained you. Caleb looked down at Raven. That sounds backward.
Most good partnerships do at first. Wesley helped turn Raven's natural behavior into consistent signals. When a vehicle approached outside Caleb's hearing range, she touched his hand and led him toward the sound. When a machine alarm rang, she tugged lightly at his trouser cuff and moved to the source. When someone called from Caleb's left side, she blocked his path until he looked. The training was not miraculous. Raven got distracted. Caleb responded too slowly. Ridge inserted himself into exercises with the confidence of a substitute teacher who had not read the lesson plan. Some afternoons ended with Wesley saying the dog understood perfectly and the human required further work. Caleb found the comment irritating because it was accurate. The deeper change was harder to name. He stopped treating help as proof of failure. He stopped mistaking isolation for strength. That surrender cost more than the crane lift, more than the leased pasture, more than any check he wrote toward Elijah's debt. It cost the old story in which needing nothing kept him safe. The following winter approached gently, with rain more often than snow and fog settling over the fields like a clean sheet. Hawthorne Dairy remained quiet, but it no longer felt abandoned in the same way. Linda Caldwell agreed to lease the cold storage building, the old milking parlor, and part of the pasture to the cooperative for a nominal amount while the property's legal future settled. She returned to Coos Bay in December to sign the agreement and visit the cemetery where her parents were buried. Caleb drove to Hawthorne to meet her. Linda stood near the calf shed in a navy coat and cream scarf, smaller in the open field than she had appeared on the computer screen. Silver hair moved around her face in the damp wind. Raven saw her before Caleb spoke. For one suspended second, the shepherd stood motionless, as if scent, shape, and memory had collided too quickly for the body to obey. Then she ran. Linda lowered herself awkwardly into the wet grass just before Raven reached her. The dog pressed against her chest, whining in a high, broken voice Caleb could hear even through the wind. Linda buried both hands in Raven's fur. She laughed once, and the laugh folded into tears. "I should have found you," she whispered. Raven licked her chin, then pressed her head under Linda's hand. Caleb stayed back. He had once imagined reunions as answers. One person returned, another forgave, and lost time arranged itself into something bearable. Real reunions did not restore time. They only allowed love to stand beside what time had taken. Linda rose after a while and walked toward the cold storage building. Raven followed at her knee with such natural attention that 2 lost years seemed for one impossible moment like a long afternoon. Halfway across the yard, Raven stopped. She looked back at Caleb. Then she ran to him, touched her nose to his right hand, and returned to Linda. She repeated the journey once more before settling between them, one shoulder against Caleb's leg, her muzzle resting on Linda's boot. Linda wiped her face. She does not know where she belongs. Caleb looked down at Raven, at the scar around her neck, at the copper bird tag polished by use, at the dog who had carried an old love through hunger, and found a new one in a storm. I think she does. There was no choice to demand from her. The past had loved her. The present had kept her alive. Neither truth required the destruction of the other. 1 year after the storm, winter returned to Coos Bay with softer hands. Rain moved across the fields in silver veils. Snow touched the higher ridges and melted by noon, and Cedar Ridge carried the smell of wet cedar, clean hay, and coffee that had been reheated too many times during cooperative meetings. The ranch had not become the grand operation Elijah Mercer once imagined. It was smaller, less profitable, and shared with more people than Elijah would have found comfortable. It was also alive in a way it had not been for years. The South Coast Farm Cooperative had 23 members by January. Megan Harris managed the record system from a desk in the old machine shed where a whiteboard listed vaccination dates, policy renewals, equipment repairs,
and Ruth Gallagher's unofficial category called People Who Need Nagging. Ruth made the calls. She claimed she was not nagging, merely providing persistence with better shoes.
Claire Bennett coordinated group veterinary days and emergency coverage, arriving with coolers, syringes, and the expression of a woman prepared to wrestle both cattle and paperwork. Tom Whitaker retired, in theory, drove documents and supplies to farms beyond reliable mail routes. Whenever Caleb mentioned the word retirement, Tom said he was volunteering. Whenever Tom mentioned volunteering, Megan asked for mileage receipts. Linda Caldwell kept ownership of Hawthorne while allowing the cooperative to use the cold storage building and milking parlor as a small recovery space for injured working dogs. There were no grand signs, no fundraising banners, no row of permanent kennels. Most dogs stayed only long enough to heal before returning to farms or approved homes. Ben Wallace repaired gates there twice a week, with Finn supervising from a dry patch of straw. Ben insisted Finn was essential to quality control. Finn mostly stole gloves. Dale Foster and Wade Monroe faced proceedings in places far removed from the smell of wet barns. Some charges would take time. Some money would never return. Some neighbors still looked away from one another in the feed store because knowing the truth did not instantly teach people how to speak after silence. Yet the harm had stopped moving quietly from one household to the next. Forms were checked by more than one set of eyes. Herd counts were confirmed before claims. Premium notices were read before panic hardened into shame. Megan's clients came back slowly. Not all. Enough. One afternoon, Caleb found her in the machine shed staring at a shelf of binders labeled by year. "You look pleased," he said. "I look suspicious. There is a difference." "Of what?" "Order. It never lasts unless somebody bullies it." Ruth called from across the shed. "I heard that, and accept the appointment." Caleb laughed before he could stop himself. It surprised him less than it once would have. Raven stood beside him, a black and tan coat full again over the old scar at her neck. Her left ear still folded slightly at the tip, giving her a look of permanent consideration. Ridge and Mercy moved along the fence line outside, nearly grown, their paws leaving dark prints in the wet grass. Raven had become Caleb's partner in ways that sounded simple when described, and enormous when lived. A nose to his hand when a vehicle approached beyond his hearing. A tug at his cuff when the pump alarm shrilled in a register he missed. A firm body blocking his path when someone called from the left. She was not magic. She was work, patience, repetition, and loyalty with teeth. Caleb had learned to answer. That was the miracle, if there was one. On a bright morning after a night of rain, the cooperative gathered to repair the north fence of Cedar Ridge before the next storm. Tom held posts. Ben checked the gate latch, with Finn watching gravely. Ruth sat in the heated cab of a supply truck and criticized angles with the authority of an empress. Megan stood near the tailgate marking expenses on a clipboard while Clover tried to remove the pencil from her hand. Claire knelt beside Harbor, who had decided a puddle required medical attention. Linda arrived near noon with sandwiches and the small brass whistle she had once used to call Raven across Hawthorne's pastures. She offered it to Caleb. "I do not think she needs this anymore." Caleb turned the whistle in his palm. It was worn smooth at the edge. "Neither do I." He hung it later beside Raven's copper bird tag on a hook near the cabin door, not as a tool, but as proof that a former life did not vanish because a new one began. By late afternoon, Caleb braced a cedar post while Tom drove it into the ground. The impact traveled through the wood into Caleb's gloves, up his arms, and into the soles of his boots. Around him, people argued over whether the fence line was straight enough for animals who had never shown architectural respect. Dogs barked. A truck changed gears on the road. Rainwater slid from fir branches. Caleb did not hear all of it.
He no longer mistook that for being outsited. Raven ranged ahead with Ridge and Mercy, then suddenly turned and came back at a trot. She touched her nose to Caleb's right hand and looked toward the road. A tractor was coming around the bend, engine low and distant. "I see it," Caleb said. Raven ran off again, satisfied. He tightened his grip on the post. Cedar Ridge had not been restored to what Elijah wanted. It had become something Elijah might not have understood at first. A smaller place, a truer place. A place where help came through open doors instead of hidden claims. Caleb still carried his father's name. He carried the shame, too, but it no longer had the only word. Elijah had loved him and had done wrong. Both things stood.
Caleb could not change the man who left the letter unfinished. He could decide what kind of man would finish the life after it. Tom lifted the driver again. The next strike came down hard, and Caleb felt it through wood, glove, bone, and ground. This time he was ready for it. Sometimes doing what is right does not bring back everything that was lost. It may not restore the farm, the money, the years, or the trust that was broken. But truth can stop pain from being passed quietly to someone else. Caleb could not undo his father's choice, and Raven could not erase the days she spent abandoned and afraid. By God's grace, they both found a way to live beyond what had happened to them. That is often where healing begins, not in a perfect past, but in one honest step taken today. May we have courage to face hard truths without losing compassion for the people inside them. May we forgive where we can repair what we have damaged, and accept help when God sends it through unexpected hands, or even through a loyal dog at the door. If this story touched your heart, comment Amen. Share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances. May God bless your home with wisdom, mercy, and peace.